Hey, Raymond here from the Beginner Photography Podcast, and today we're talking about documentary wedding photography with one of the best. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast with Raymond Hatfield, the podcast dedicated to helping you grow your photography skills. Raymond interviews the world's top photographers in their field to ask questions that will get you taking better photos today. Now, with you as always, husband, father, home brewer, LA Dodger fan, and Indianapolis wedding photographer, Raymond Hatfield.
Welcome back to this episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. As always, I am Raymond, your host, and I wanted to start off today's episode with a big shout out for a iTunes review that we got, and this review comes from Ashley. Ashley says, you can stop looking, you have found it. The rest of her review says, this podcast helped motivate me into turning my dream of becoming a better photographer and building a business into a reality. In the interviews, it is refreshing to hear that even photographers that are living their dreams did not get where they are right now overnight. This podcast is truly the best. Thank you so much, Ashley, for leaving that review in iTunes. I would be so grateful if you are listening right now, if you haven't left the podcast a review, for you to leave a quick review in whatever podcast player you are listening to. And to Ashley's point, I think that all of this comes down to persistence, right? All the photographers who I talked to just didn't get there overnight. Like she says, it's all about persistence. It's all about once you start, just keep going. Half the battle, or 99% of the battle, is just showing up. So if you just keep going, you're going to find that success. But if you are having trouble even just getting started, I wanted to invite you to take my online mini course called Conquer Your Camera, where you will learn about the 3 most important aspects to photography and how to use your camera to conquer them. So if you want to learn more, you can about the mini course, just head over to learn.beginnerphotographypodcast.com. Again, that is learn, Learn, .beginnerphotographypodcast.com. So today's episode is with one of the world's best in his field, and he clears up a lot of the confusion about what it really means to be a documentary wedding photographer. And as always, I have cut out a portion of the interview that focuses on business just for premium members. So in today's, the premium members are going to hear how to convey the power of documentary style to couples to book for their wedding. We're going to hear Kevin's approach to telling the story of a wedding day through the album and how it affects the way that he shoots on the wedding day, and how Kevin structures his wedding packages for sale to work best for him. So if you want to become a premium member and hear all about the business side of photography, just head over to beginnerphotographypodcast.com and then click the premium membership link at the top of the page. So that is it. We're going to get into today's interview right now with Kevin Mullins. Today's guest is Kevin Mullins, a UK documentary wedding photographer in the truest form. Kevin has an incredible ability to be able to capture rich stories in a single frame with next to no interaction. Today, I'm really excited to chat about seeing the bigger picture, as you might say. So, Kevin, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
No problem, Raymond. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Of course, you are a photographer who I am very excited to chat with, not only being a fellow Fuji photographer, but a photographer who I've been following for a long time, almost since I started. And I think that it's just because of your approach that you take at weddings. I've heard you on other podcasts, and I just kind of love everything that you stand for. So today, I'm really excited to have you share with the listeners kind of what is documentary photography, because I think that term gets skewed in many ways. Mm-hmm. And if anybody can talk to that point, it's going to be you. So before we get into that, can you share how you got your start in photography?
Oh man, it's quite a long story really, but I'll keep it short. I was, 2007, 2008, something like that. I was not a photographer, never owned a camera, didn't have any ambition to be a photographer at all. I was working in IT, as a lot of photographers start out, and 5 hours commuting every day, 2.5 hours each way was just a bit too much. And one day I picked up a magazine on a train, one of those free magazines, and it was an article about weddings, not photography, but about weddings. And I was just about to flick through it. Like, weddings had no interest to me whatsoever. And then I saw these little black and white pictures at the bottom from a photographer called Jeff Askoff, who ended up becoming a huge inspiration. And so I went home to my wife and I said, "I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to become a wedding photographer."
Right away.
Yeah, and she was like, "Well, well, A, you don't own a camera. B, you've never taken pictures in your life, and C, you really do not have the personality to be a wedding photographer."
Jeez.
But that was it, and that was the seed was sown then, and I just kind of went with it and went on some workshops and stuff, and I think now I've done like 490 odd weddings 10 years later. So yeah.
Oh my gosh. What was it that what was it about those photos from Jeff that made you think like I could do this? Like I want to do this.
Yeah, it wasn't a case of I could do it. It was a case of wanted to. Yeah, that's worth pointing out because I just loved. I'd always admired documentary photography, but without really knowing it. We have the Sunday Times over here, and the Sunday Times magazine is a very famous photojournalistically based magazine. And I'd always look at those images. Often they were about war and poverty and stuff, but it was always the photojournalism of people like Don McCullum and stuff, where those images were always the ones that I knew spoke to me. I had no idea why. I'd much rather look at those types of images than a posed portrait or something, So when I realized that there was an opportunity in wedding photography to do that, I thought, well, hang on, I'm going to try this. This sounds great. And the whole idea was to give me my life back and spend more time with the family and, not have to do this terrible commute every day. And and it worked really well. It was a big shift because I used to play rugby and that was always on Saturdays, and that whilst I got a lot more time during the week, I lost my Saturdays generally. So I
Yeah.
lost my kind of rugby pals and all that kind of stuff. But it was a great move, and we've my wife has helped me enormously in the business, of course, and it's facilitated us having, I think, a way better life. I don't drive around in a Maserati, unfortunately, but it's definitely a better life.
Yeah. I understand that. So when before you had seen those images, kind of those more reportage style wedding images, did you have a skewed idea of what wedding photography was? Like, did this change things for you? Is that it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I don't know whether it's the same in the States, but over here certainly, and definitely at that time, wedding photography was seen as the bottom of the barrel. It was if you were getting married, it was just another commodity on the list. Wedding venue, dress, shoes, car hire, photography, and you would normally just pick up the phone, ring the nearest photographer. He'd turn up. He'd stand on a step ladder. He'd boss everybody around. He'd take a picture of the cake. Then he'd go home. And that's what I always thought wedding photography was. And all of my friends' weddings that I'd been to, which were all getting married around about the same time, it'd always been like that. Don't get me wrong, they were taking nice pictures, but it was very formulaic, and it was the
Mhm.
part of the day that everybody hated. Oh no, 25 group shots and
Yeah.
the long list and everything like that. So when I realized that wasn't necessarily the way it had to be done, then suddenly I thought, hang on, this could be really interesting, and that's how it kind of manifested itself, really.
Wow. That's so cool how it kind of like once you saw those photos, that kind of grew in your head like, wait a second, I can kind of do my own thing.
Yeah,
So the next step was to buy a camera.
yeah, yeah.
So when you bought that camera, what would you say were your technical what was your technical knowledge before you had picked up a camera or before you
Mm,
purchased that camera on a scale from 1 to 10?
one.
1. Okay.
Yeah.
So that was
So
obviously a hurdle for you.
I mean, of course, when I was a kid, I'd had like instant kind of Kodak beach cameras, if you like, and point and take the film, and it got developed. There's no talent whatsoever involved in that. You never had any kind of idea of exposure, or the only thing I ever remember is my dad always used to say to me, make sure the sun is at the back, is behind you, basically, and that was it. And so I bought a Canon, what we would call 300D, which I think was the entry level Rebel, whatever it's
Yeah,
called
like the
in
XT, I believe.
yeah, the like the
Uh-huh.
cheapest DSLR I could get my hand on. And really, the only reason I chose a Canon one over a Nikon one was because my the printer we use in work, or we used in work at the time, was a Canon printer. So I just had brand awareness, and
Uh-huh.
so I thought, well, they make pretty good printers and photocopiers and stuff. So I went to Jessop's and bought a Canon DSLR, and the manuals that come with those cameras, all cameras still are terrible. So there was no such thing really as like YouTube was very embryonic. There was no such thing as online mentoring or training, and so I just picked it up and just did what I could with it. And that was it.
So totally self-taught. You just went out there and just practiced until you figured it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally. And we just had a baby at the time, so of course I had the perfect way of
Subject.
practicing. Yeah, subject.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny. We have a member in the Facebook group. His name is Jason, and he just over the weekend had his first child, and he was excited. What he posted was that he got time to practice with his 35 mil lens, his brand new 35 mil lens, and
Cool.
didn't even mention the baby. So I'm sure
Yeah.
that he's going to appreciate that as well. So what would you say was one of the hardest aspects of, excuse me, maybe exposure or photography for you to kind of get the grasp of? Was there anything that you were struggling with that took a while to figure out?
Yeah, I guess it's a bit of a cliche, but it's this idea of understanding the light, I suppose. So when I first started shooting, I would, I'd fight against the light all of the time. So I was always riding exposure compensation, and, never really had an understanding that the light was, because I shoot all natural light or available light. And so I had no real understanding that light is a friend rather than an enemy. And I was just, like I say, riding exposure compensation and stuff. So now, of course, I use the light. I see where it's coming from. I meter for the light accordingly. I use a lot of spot metering to help the light make something for me in the camera. But that was really something that I found very hard. So right at the beginning, I would go into perhaps I don't know, let's just say a dark bridal prep room with one window. And I couldn't figure out why, from one end of the room, everything was a silhouette, and from the other end of the room, everything was blown out. And, and so I was constantly riding that exposure compensation and to try and deal with it. And then, then it all kind of comes together with exposure and understanding the exposure triangle. But yeah, that was a kind of light bulb moment, so to speak, when I finally figured that out, which wasn't too long after I started. But that was the thing that technically wise, that I struggled with the most.
Right, right. It's hard. Like if you're
Mm.
not used to photography, seeing with your eyes light, because I think that our eyes they're so good at not only distinguishing light but color as well,
Mhm.
that you just kind of feel that when you go into a room, the entire room has an even amount of light. But
Yeah,
as you said there, you get towards a window and everything changes.
yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So I think it's kind of interesting for you, like to hear your story about how you got into weddings. Like it was kind of from the beginning. You're like, oh, I want to get into photography because
Mhm.
of this idea of shooting weddings. So um, you needed to learn about weddings, kind of the wedding day and how you were going to shoot it. So this is kind of where you started in finding documentary wedding photography. Can you define what you considered documentary wedding photography?
Yeah, I think. Part of the reason why I kind of did it, and the reason why I still do it and I still enjoy it, is because I was not shackled by any of those rules. The kind of posing and group shots and all of that kind of stuff, and the formula, if you like, of wedding photography. So I always knew from the beginning that I wanted to do it in a documentary way. What documentary was at the time for me basically meant not doing group shots. That's really as far as I did not and still do not have the personality to organize people like that. So for me, right at the beginning, it essentially was just snapshots, candid snapshots, a lot of headshots. When I started shooting weddings properly, I bought kind of lenses, good lenses and stuff. I had a 70 to 200, and they were essentially headshots of people just like not doing much. There was no story to them. I kind of realized after a while that actually I need to be going wider. I need to be getting closer, but going wider with wider lenses and telling more of a story. That's what documentary meant to me then. But initially, it was really this idea of just taking candid pictures, if you like, candid snaps. And I suppose to a certain extent, that's what they were. They were just candid snaps. And I still work very hard at trying to layer the story, and work on a lot of themes and mantras of kind of start, middle, and end, and telling a story properly rather than it just being a whole series of snapshots, of headshots of people. Because I think that to a certain extent everybody does those anyway. I still do them as well. I still think it's important to have record shots, but it's not necessarily something that lends itself now, at least in my understanding, to a story, and ultimately it should be a story rather than just a series of individual pictures.
Sure, sure. So if getting into documentary wedding photography, you were excited about it because you weren't going to take group photos, or you wouldn't be pressured to take these group photos. Did you get any kind of pushback on that in the beginning, or was there any fear?
Yeah, I think, and even these days, I still do a couple of group shots if people want it. Although it's very minimal part now. But yeah, right at the beginning, I mean, when I do workshops and stuff, I actually show pictures from my very first wedding to the students, because I think it's important for them to see that. And one of the things that happened at my very first wedding was I said to them, this is the way that I do things. It's documentary. And they were like, yeah, that's cool. We love the idea. And then at about 9 o'clock, just as I put all my cameras away, they said, what about all the group shots? And I was like, what do you mean? And they went, yeah, we need loads of group shots. And so I just panicked and, just took these pretty poor group shots of, and I think it was 45 of them in the end.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
yeah, exactly. So I came home and I said to my wife, I said, I don't think this is working, because, the whole idea was for me to have a better way of life, and it just stressed me out really bad. So, I made a very conscious decision to adjust the branding and marketing of the business to ensure that, as much as my branding is there to attract people, it's also there as a filter. So it doesn't happen these days. It doesn't happen so much. But back in the beginning, yeah, it was definitely a case of not really being brave enough to say to people, well, I suppose not to say to them, but to educate them and say, actually, you know what, this is how I'm, this is my style. And of course, if you want, something else, then I can recommend somebody else who can do that for you. But if you want me and you want the stuff that you see on my website, then this essentially is how I do things. And that works. It works really well. So I rarely, rarely have any issues with kind of that idea that people see what they want on the website and then want more. Want more of the traditional stuff, because the clients are filtered, and it works really well now. But yeah, right at the beginning, it was a bit of a challenge.
I can imagine. So I know that from my own personal story, when I started, I did a lot of things that I didn't necessarily want to because I wanted to be shooting weddings.
Mhm.
And then, like you said, used my website to filter out people. And then now I'm kind of at this point to where I'm shooting more of what it is that I do like. Would you recommend taking a similar path? Or would you say just straight from the beginning, say, I do this, I don't do this. If you want somebody else, go for it.
Yeah, I think just be brave, and the whole point of most people become wedding photographers. Uh, you know, like there is nobody in school, in high school, when they say to you, "What do you want to be when you leave school?" Nobody ever puts their hand up and goes, "I want to be a wedding photographer." Right? It just doesn't happen. They
Right.
might want to be a fashion photographer or a sports or music photographer, but not weddings. So you end up becoming a wedding photographer through fortune, circumstance, whether that's simply that your brother or sister asked you to photograph a wedding because you had a nice camera, or whether it's because you wanted a completely different way of life, something that was a bit easier on the on your kind of family life. Whatever reason, you end up doing it through vocation. I think, and if it's vocational, you're doing it because you want to be doing it, then you certainly don't want to be coming back from those weddings thinking, that was, I didn't like it. I didn't enjoy it. So you have to. I believe people need to be brave and be able to just say, actually, this is how I do it. And if there's absolutely nothing wrong in being a documentary photographer that also does lots of group shots and lots of portraits and all that. There's plenty of people out there that do that, of course. But the elements of the day that you don't want to do, um, don't do them or don't market them, at least, because you will end up falling out of love with it. And because it is partly a vocation, then you're going to end up going back to the old day job or whatever that was, and hitting the road again. So
Yeah.
yeah, you've got to, you do need to be pretty strong, I think, and without being rude. But education is the key thing for the clients. There's I'll never say no to somebody. I'm not going to say no way, I don't do that. But I'll say, hey, well, you know what, I can do that, but that will take up so much time, and you just won't get the stuff you see on my website, which is really what you want. So have a think about it, and let me know, and that works all the time.
hmm So you said something there that really caught my attention, and that was that you can be a documentary wedding photographer and still get like group shots and post portraits and stuff. Um, I guess I'm a little confused, I suppose. Like, what would make that still a documentary photographer? Does that make sense? Could you expand
Yeah.
on that a little bit?
Yeah. No, it does, absolutely. And I guess the point I'm making is, whilst I don't do that, I mean, like I say, I would do a couple of group shots, but that's it. The There are plenty of people out there who will set aside half an hour of the day to do bridal portraits and more group shots, etc. And just because they do that doesn't mean for the rest of the 9.5 hours of the day where they're shooting candidly, they're not good documentary wedding photographers.
Ah,
And it often it comes down to the marketing side of things where the confusion lies, I think. For example, I don't think anybody can come to my website and expect me to be anything other than what they see. But there are plenty of people out there who market themselves as documentary, and then actually on the day they spend all of their time setting up candid shots, which aren't candid, of course, but setting up shots to make them look natural. And that definitely is not documentary photography. That's staging
sure.
something to look natural.
Ah,
um,
okay.
and not only is that kind of disingenuous to the term, but also I would imagine it's quite upsetting for the clients who might be expecting to just have a fun old day with their friends and family doing their thing while the photographer does his thing. But then being told to go and stand by that window, or do this, do that. And that's my kind of definition, if you like, of it. And of course it's only mine. Other people's definitions can be different. Is that I do not have any guidance or direction for my clients whatsoever. So for example, if the wedding dress is in a bag lying on the floor in the bridal prep room, that's the picture, or I
hmm
just wouldn't take that picture. But I'm not going to be taking that dress out and hanging it up anywhere or anything like that. If the bridesmaid is doing that for whatever reason, then I'll probably take pictures of her doing that rather than the actual thing at the end, maybe. But it's about the inference of direction, I think. And but like I say, people can and do set aside time to do the more traditional stuff, and that doesn't make them a worse or better photographer.
Yes, I gotcha. That made it perfectly clear to me. So I totally understand that. So thank you very much for clearing that up for me, because I'm not. I think you're right. I think a lot of it is the marketing, because you see a lot of wedding photographers market themselves as documentary, but then
Mm.
maybe they'll post like a. There's one photographer I'm thinking of who does like some behind the scenes photos at like weddings and stuff, and it's very much like, hey, come over here, like let's do this, like
Yeah.
smile together, and that's not.
Mm.
As you said, that's not documentary wedding photography.
No.
So if kind of your job is to tell a story of a wedding day, you want to properly capture everything, including light as
Mm.
well as emotion between family members. Wedding days there's lots of emotions already. Is there something that you do before the wedding to uh, get an idea of a family dynamic, so that when you show up, you already have an idea of a story that you're going to tell? Or do you show up and say, let's go, let me figure it out from here?
Yeah, basically, I very rarely meet clients beforehand. Very rarely. If they want to meet me, if they want to come to the studio and have a coffee or something, then absolutely fine. But generally, I don't. And sometimes when the conversation comes up about, do we need to meet? I actually say to them, no, because if I come with a complete blank canvas without any expectations or any preconceived ideas of what you are like or your family are like, then everything is as natural as it possibly can be. And that works really well for me because I can just do my thing, and I don't need to know that mum and dad are divorced and hate each other, or there's a brother that nobody's spoken to for 15 years. Because if I know all of those things, then you know that can affect my judgment, perhaps. Of course, it makes no difference in terms of the photos, really, because I'm not guiding or setting anything up. And if they're not going to stand next to each other because they don't like each other, then there will be no pictures of them standing next to each other because they don't like each other. I'm not going to try
Right.
and force them to do that. So yeah. I mean, a kind of example was this weekend at this weekend's wedding. I went, and it turned out that there was a pretty well known person at the wedding. Was the sister of the groom, in fact. And I had no idea. I had no idea whatsoever. Nobody had told me that. And in fact, we got all the way through to pretty much the speeches before I realized who this person was. And then I put two and two together, and I was like, right, okay, now I understand. But I'm guessing because they hadn't told me that, and they didn't, they I reacted in such a natural way that I wasn't kind of starstruck or anything, or it was just like you're just anybody else who I didn't recognize.
Of course, of course. Now, kind of going back to that, did knowing that, did that new piece of information change the way that you tried to capture any photos from there on out?
Not really. I mean, I've done several kind of what I would class as minor celebrities. Minor celebrities to me, major celebrities to other people. And yeah, I mean, I don't really, I don't allow it to bother me.
So you weren't trying to find the one shot for the website or anything like that?
No, no,
No,
I
no.
don't. I always think, and I think this is kind of important, that my job is entirely on the day is entirely to produce pictures for the wedding clients. Okay, I try not to. It's hard not to, but I try not to ever think about portfolio, awards, blog posts, or anything. If a good blog post or a good picture or a good award or whatever comes because of the pictures I took on the day, then that's a bonus. But
Mhm.
I try not to allow my shooting on the day to be affected by, you know, what what I want to put on my marketing. Um, and a lot of people will do that, and I think that's sad because ultimately what I want to do is give a set of images to my clients that they can look back on in 40 years time, and it be just a true memory of their day rather than it being for me and my business. They've
Yes.
already paid me, and that's the most important thing.
Yeah, of course. No, that totally makes sense. So then in kind of this world of like uh where Pinterest and very bright and airy type photos, how do you personally convey the power of documentary approach to your wedding clients? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of subtle messages on my website in terms of for example, it's not just pictures. Like my portfolio is a story. I talk to people on my portfolio page about how I took this picture, why I took this picture. I even include some bad pictures, and I explain that technically it's a bad picture, but the moment is the important thing here. So
Mm,
I try and manifest it in terms of the way that I would speak to them face to face, as if we were flicking through their childhood photo album. And I even say things like, when you look at the pictures that you have from your childhood, do you are you interested in your school portraits, or do you smile and laugh more at the pictures of you and your mum at the park, on the beach at Christmas, the candid stuff that your uncle took on his old, instant printer picture camera
Sure.
that,
Yeah.
is faded and is blown out or whatever, but it's those pictures that are the important ones, right? And that, as soon as you start having those kind of conversations or passing that message, then people really understand it, I think. But you're right about the kind of Instagram generation and Pinterest and the brightness of everything. And there are, for those people, there are other photographers, and there's plenty of wedding photographers to go around.
Absolutely, especially who shoot very bright and airy style for sure.
Mhm.
So on a wedding day, I know I often get asked by the bridal party to take a certain photo, or can I see the back of the like can I see how that photo turned out or anything. Um, how do you? Okay, or I'll give you another example. I am not the cheapest wedding photographer here in Indianapolis, and I shot a wedding for a couple who um, I would say that I was about 90% of their budget. They really wanted amazing photos, right?
Mhm.
Is what they said. They said, we really don't care about anything else. We want great portraits. We want, great photos that we're going to remember the day by. And I said, okay, absolutely. So I showed up, great couple. But the bridal party was very much like, okay, now let's, do this photo, let's do that photo. And it
Mhm.
was hard for me to say, that's not what it is that I do. But it was the bridal party who was taking more control over the photos than the couple was.
Mhm.
Do you ever find yourself in a situation where a bridal party is either asking for a certain style of photo that may be goofy or Pinterest like, and then because your couple is going to have a better idea of your photography than they will? How would you handle a situation like that? Hey, Raymond here, and if you're listening to this, you are listening to the free version of today's interview. If you want to hear more from today's guest about the business of photography, consider becoming a premium member. Every week, guests answer questions about products, pricing, packages, and so much more that will help your growing photography business thrive. This is the next logical step. To join, head over to beginnerphotographypodcast.com and click the premium membership button at the top of the page.
Okay. Yeah.
Do you think that there are any misconceptions or something that would surprise people to know about being a documentary wedding photographer?
I think, I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of people, not potential clients, but potential photographers, think that it's an easy way of becoming a wedding photographer. It's easier to do this than to understand posing and lighting and all that kind of stuff. And to a certain extent, it is. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it is a talent to be able to pose well and light well, etc. Um, but it's not just a series of it's there are a lot of people, a lot of photographers out there who will take 20,000 frames at a wedding and take 500 frames at the end, and essentially hoping for the best.
Sure.
And that's also fine if that's the way they want to operate and that's the way they want to work. Absolutely. But I think from a photography point of view, it's telling a story and layering a story and connecting the dots and having the cohesion throughout the day that tells a full um, history of the event, rather than just taking thousands and thousands of shots and hoping that you get some good pictures. That's the challenge. That's the hardest thing. And now, don't get me wrong. I overshoot as well. As much as the next person. Maybe not 20,000 pictures, but I do overshoot. But I like in my camera bag. I have the 5 W's written underneath the lid of my camera bag, and they stand for who, why, what, where, and when. So if ever I'm struggling at a wedding, and I can't, there's nothing happening. It's slow, it's pedestrian. I look at that, I'm reminded of those 5 W's, and as long as I've answered who, why, what, where, and when, then that's the story. That's all of those parts are connected, and it's just like writing a newspaper article or writing a novel. It's the who, why, what, where, and when. You get that part right, you've got a story. And that stops me from having to run around with a headless chicken and thinking, oh man, I haven't got any pictures, I don't know what to do, and then you just end up taking pictures for the sake of it.
Yeah.
And I think also one of the challenges for documentary style photographers is to have the confidence to stop photographing and listen, watch, look at the light, look at the characters, put the cameras down, and understand the environment, and then start taking pictures again. I feel that, and this is true for all wedding photographers, I guess, I feel that because we're being paid to be there, we feel like if the clients are looking, we should be taking pictures, right? We should have
Yes.
the camera stuck to our face. Um, and that's not true, because that means they're just paying you to be a mechanical photographer. Anybody can press the button on the top of the camera. Anybody can do that. But only you can see what you see through the viewfinder, and only I can see what I see through the viewfinder. And so sometimes you need to stop and slow down and watch and wait and listen and smell the kitchen, whatever it is that manifests in order to get the pictures that will tell the story of the day. And don't be afraid to just stop, and it's not, you're not there. I often say to my clients, I'm not there as a photographer, I'm there as an observer. And that's the thing. A photographer is a technical function. Photography is a technical function. Seeing is not. And that's kind of a difference.
Yes. I think that that's really important to hear, especially from me as somebody who I feel that exact same way. I feel, if I'm being paid to be there, a lot of people look at wedding photography already as very much a luxury. And here I
Mm.
am as a service provider not doing anything, like if I'm just standing there. And this happens a lot during meal time, is typically people don't like photos of themselves eating. Do you find
Yeah.
anything, is there anything that you do during mealtime to kind of fill that gap?
Yeah, I sit down and I eat.
I
Yeah,
should listen to
no,
that.
I take a break, yeah, and that's all in the contract and everything. I mean, if something happens, for example, the speeches might be between courses, then obviously I'll come in and out. But yeah, I mean, I pictures of people eating is not a
Nobody wants
isn't
that.
not, people don't want that.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Even if you look at,
Occasionally, if I
go on.
sorry, no, I was going to say, sometimes if I spot maybe a child eating something, like stuffing a cake in their face or something, then maybe that's an interesting picture.
Mhm.
But generally, once they sit there, normally I'll have been shooting for 6 hours or so by the time they sit down for their meal. So I'm ready for a break at that point.
Yeah, I always think that it's weird that how popular the cake cutting shot is. Then people want
Mm,
that picture of them eating cake. I think to myself, like, you're not gonna frame this. Like, who wants a picture of
no.
them being stuffed with cake? So yeah, unless it's a
Yeah.
child, I don't understand. I don't understand. So in the group, I asked some people some questions, what questions they had about documentary wedding photography. And Matei, I think I pronounced that right. I believe he's French. I could have got that totally wrong. He wanted to know specifically, he asked, how difficult is it to cover the whole wedding day in a reportage style? So I know that you answered that a little bit earlier. We kind of talked about your philosophy, but I will expand upon that a little bit without doing much posing. When you show
Mhm,
up, what is it that you're looking for aside from the who, what, when, where, and why? There's obviously light, right? And there's emotion. So,
mhm.
is there a way that you try to go about capturing a scene in front of you that kind of makes it repeatable for you, that is like your style? Did that question make sense at all?
Yeah, kind of. But the answer is not really, because when you shoot in a purely candid style, every single wedding is different, like every single one. And there's no formula as such. I mean, weddings themselves are quite
Yeah.
formulaic, so they kind of fall into a pattern. I suppose because I'm really obsessed by kind of the interaction between people and the emotional play between them. So when, for example, at the end of the ceremony, when people start hugging each other, that's really my important time. They're the pictures that I really want to get, and I get in really close to get those pictures. But at the same time, I know that I don't want to be in the way or a menace. So I'll nearly always make sure I'm behind the bride or the groom or the person who's being hugged. And I'm capturing the huggers rather than the hugged. Um, and that way the bride, doesn't even see me, doesn't notice me. I do my thing, and I get in close and I move around very quickly. And that's kind of the thing that I'm when that doesn't happen for whatever reason, when people don't have that part where they don't hug or whatever, for whatever reason, then that's quite sad for me. And I know that it often sets a trend for the rest of the day. um, but yeah, I mean, it's yeah, literally every single wedding is different.
Right.
Everyone, I rarely, I've never gone down the route of being recommended by wedding venues. Not that there's anything wrong with that, of course, but I just have never gone down that route. So it's rare for me to be at the same venue very often. Um, so it's everyone is a new adventure.
Sure. So that taking photos of guests kind of sparked another question. I think it was you who I heard on Andrew Helmage's PhotoBiz Exposed podcast. I believe that you said something to the effect. Now it could have been somebody else, so please correct me if I'm
Mhm.
wrong. That like your ultimate goal or dream would be to go to a wedding and be confused as a guest, so that like nobody knew that you were there. Does that sound familiar? Am I thinking of somebody
Yeah.
else?
No, no, no. I mean, it's something that I probably would have said. Yeah,
Okay.
it's I one of the testimonials I have on my website, in fact, is to that point. It's she says that the comments she got from a lot of her guests were they didn't even know they had a wedding photographer.
That's wonderful.
And that's the ultimate. That's the utopia, of course. And as apart from during the ceremony, I suppose, where you're often the only one either at the front or the back. For the rest of the time, I just I behave like a guest. I use small cameras. I dress like a guest as much as I can. I just do my thing,
Yeah.
and I'm not telling people to do anything, to say cheese or anything. It's like they do often just totally forget I'm there. And that's a great thing. I mean, generally it's obvious that I am the official. I'm the only single guy there with two cameras, for
Sure. Yeah.
example.
Bag full of
But other than that, I'm doing my absolute best to just be a guest. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, just be a guest.
So how does that? Has there ever been a time where you've had to interact with a guest? Maybe they're asking lots of questions or something, and like you need to get back to work. How does it? So it was John specifically within the Facebook group asked, "What is it like interacting with guests when you're just trying to be a fly on the wall?"
Well, yeah. I mean, when I say that, I don't interact with them. If they talk to me or we have a conversation, just a general chat, often people ask me about my
Uh-huh.
cameras and that kind of stuff. Of course, I'm going to speak to them. Occasionally, if I can see some of the guys looking at the football scores or whatever, I'll go over and say, "What's the score?" That kind of thing. I'm not trying to be completely invisible and never speak to anybody. But what I won't do is kind of
Initiate.
affect a particular
Oh,
moment by doing anything. So yeah, I mean, I will chat to them and everything, and occasionally you do get the odd guest that is a bit more friendly than others in terms of especially kind of photography questions and everything, and yeah, just polite and then walk away.
yeah, sure. No, that makes
My friend Neil always says that one of the questions we always get asked is, "How many pictures have you taken today?"
right.
Then, and Neil always says, to try and confuse me, he says, "Oh, about 20 gallons," and and then of course their face just changes, and then we just
Just
walk
walk
off and
away.
just leave them in this confusion.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's genius. I was thinking, I was like, maybe if you said like a small number, like 12.
yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
convert it to gallons. That's wonderful. Um, when you're shooting like I can only imagine. I've never been to the UK, but from photos that I've seen of weddings,
Mhm,
typically they're older venues. They're much
mhm,
darker than
mhm.
not as much available light. And I know that cameras today, especially Fuji, can operate at just like incredible ISOs. Do you use any sort of artificial light at all? And what do you do when it gets too dark?
Yeah, so the only lights that I typically take with me these days is it's called a Manfrotto Lumimuse. So it's a little handheld LED.
Mhm.
I don't have it to hand, but it's no bigger than this thing
Oh
here.
yeah, okay.
You know,
So
that's a memory card holder, but it's about the same size, and I can hold that. It's rechargeable LED. I charge it once a year, and I just use it for perhaps the first dance or something, and that's it. And like my philosophy is that if it's light enough for people to see each other, then it's light enough for my camera to see them.
mhm.
That's the way that I work, and uh, you know, if I have to slow the shutter speed down or push the ISO up, then that's it. Also, that's fine. But honestly, it's the DJs, the discos, the bands. They all have lights that we can work with. It's fine.
So just finding
Really
a
not an
spot to
issue.
where you can utilize their lights that they have already
Yeah,
set up.
yeah. And if the light isn't good, then I'll use that Lumimuse. And I don't like using it because it looks artificial. It just doesn't look. It's if the DJ or somebody sets up specific lights, then I want the pictures to remind the bride and groom of the particular lighting that was there when they had their first dance.
Uh-huh.
If I go and set up off camera flash and all that kind of stuff, then all that does is remind them of the time that I set up off camera flash.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why I don't do it. But again, just because I don't do that, it's partly just no knowledge and laziness perhaps even, but it doesn't mean that it's wrong to do that. I've got very good friends who do that and do it very well, and which, as you said earlier, would be a boring world if we were all the same.
Right, right. So then last question here for you. Have you ever got a couple who said, "Oh my gosh, this photo is way too grainy. What were you doing here?"
No,
No.
no, I haven't. But that doesn't mean they haven't thought that or said it to themselves. But they've never actually said it to me.
Then there you go. If it's never been told to you, then it's never happened. We're going to go with that. I think a lot of
Yeah,
beginners get so worried over ISO performance, scared to push their camera past like 800, you know?
yeah,
And you're
yeah,
just living proof right here that if, you're shooting in a very dark venue, you can push it
yeah.
upwards of higher than 6400.
Yeah, I go 12,800. Yeah,
See, there you
easily.
go,
Yeah,
12,800, and you've never heard a complaint from a client to you.
never.
There you go. Just focus on getting that shot.
Mm,
Just focus on getting that shot.
yeah, yeah.
Kevin, I really want to be mindful of your time. I appreciate everything that you have shared today. Before I let you go, can you please let the listeners know where they can find you online?
You can indeed. Thank you very much. It's my website is kevinmullinsphotography.co.uk. Instagram is Kevin Mullins Photography, and we also run a podcast called the FujiCast, which they can find at fujicast.co.uk or on any podcast network, specifically Fujifilm kind of stuff.
Yeah,
But
all the
yeah,
good
that's
stuff.
it.
All
Yeah,
the good
all the good.
stuff. Yeah. Well, Kevin, again, thank you so much for coming on the show. And I, I just want to tell you one last time that I truly enjoy looking at your photos, and you inspire me to be a better photographer. So this was a joy to talk to you today. So thank you.
Mm. Thanks, Raymond. It's been great. It's really pleasurable to be here.
How about that? If you if you were unaware of Kevin Mullins before this point, please, please, please check out some of his work. If you're listening on your phone, you should be able to just swipe up to view the show notes where I've included links to some of his photos. But if you're on Instagram, Facebook, please look at his work. Check out his website. It is really something that is almost, I mean, the photos that he is able to anticipate and take that are completely candid with no interaction are so much better than the photos that I try to manipulate and create a moment around. So that is a skill that is just so impressive to see. And I think one of my biggest takeaways was that everyone kind of told Kevin that he wasn't set out, to shoot weddings, but it was because of his fresh approach, and he found something that he meshed with, and obviously he's killing it. So just don't listen to what others are saying if it feels right to you when it comes to photography. So there you go. That is it for today's interview. Until next week, I want you to get out. I want you to keep shooting. I want you to focus on yourself and stay safe. All right, that's it. I love you all.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, please leave us a review in iTunes or your favorite podcast player. And continue the conversation with Raymond and other listeners of the podcast by joining the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group today. Thank you. We'll see you again next week.